Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We say Jazakallah to you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Now, last week, Friday, Muslim marriages were finally officially recognized in South Africa. The Department of Home Affairs issued 33 South African marriage certificates acknowledging Muslim unions for the first time in the country's history. The department changed its internal systems, meaning unions between members of the Muslim community are now recognized. Now, joining me now to break this down, I'd like to welcome attorney at law and no stranger to our channel, Yousha Tayob. Yousha, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakallah so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you and the listeners. My pleasure.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Yousha, just your initial reaction to this. One would assume that this was an inevitable decision that had to happen from Home Affairs.
You know, it was a strange decision because when one looks at the Constitutional Court judgment in the Women's Legal Center matter, it dealt with the constitutionality of the Marriage Act and the Divorce Act, and not necessarily the issuance of marriage certificates, unlike the civil law application, civil law marriages. So I think what it's done is it's going to create a lot of confusion because what does now happen is that one is either married by nikah, and that nikah certificate is then issued into that little A3 marriage certificate that is issued in the civil law, but the consequences of the nikah do not follow. So it's not yet recognized, even though the Divorce Act has been amended to include consequences of a failed marriage. Unfortunately, neither the nikah, nor the certificate, nor the Divorce Amendment Act apply Sharia, and that is a huge problem for us.
Okay, so Yousha,
so that's the confusion.
Yeah, Yousha, what I want to ask is, okay, so we had obviously prior to Leon Schreiber, the Home Affairs Minister, announcing this or making this announcement, marriages would obviously have to go through the South African courts away, if I stand to be corrected. So what changes now, given that in the official capacity, and I say official capacity because this was an official Home Affairs Department announcement, that now Islamic marriages are recognized from a country perspective?
So literally, it's the A3 sheet of paper that was issued to all civil marriages that are conducted before a delegated marriage officer, Department of Home Affairs. You now get the A3 certificate based on the nikah, provided that the marriage is performed by a designated marriage officer. And so the default position on all of these is that the marriage is out of community or property, which is Sharia compliant, but that's about where the Sharia compliance stops. All the intended consequences are un-Islamic. Certainly the Divorce Amendment Act caters for non-Sharia principles. So it's literally just an A3 sheet of paper that says your marriage was conducted by a designated marriage officer, and for that purpose, this marriage is recognized on the Home Affairs system. But for Muslims, it's actually a disaster.
You say disaster.
And there's no real other consequence other than a piece of paper.
Yeah, I want to ask, I mean, you mentioned a disaster. So anyone now listening or watching this broadcast asking, okay, there's a bit of fear now when nikah is being conducted, and now with this new amendment that has happened. Could you maybe talk to us about that, Yousha, in terms of, the cons with regards to this, maybe?
Yeah, so it's essentially the consequences that people need to understand. I mean, we're busy putting together a bulletin, and hopefully we'll get that out into the public very shortly. But I think the best way of doing it is by sharing some examples. So a court now is designated to pronounce a talaq. The consequences of that talaq are no longer in the hands of the man. A court must endorse that talaq, which you know and I know is against Allah's law.
So, which court is this again? Yousha, to just disturb you, which court are you referring to now that can actually designate a talaq?
A secular court, a South African secular court.
Okay.
The High Court is designated to deal with it. And so South African secular court is now tasked with endorsing a talaq or testing the veracity of it and whether it was valid or not. So the final arbiter on a talaq will now be a civil court, secular court in this country. Similarly, the Islamic law does not recognize the concept of redistribution. The Divorce Amendment Act now does that. So that is in direct conflict with Allah's laws, with the Sharia law. There's also the provision in the Divorce Amendment Act where in the Sharia we talk about the duty of support emanating from the man. Now that reciprocal duty of support is an obligation of both the man and the woman. A court can order a woman to provide a duty of support to the family when we all know that in terms of the Sharia, that is not allowed. It's the man's duty to provide within his means for his home. Maintenance, inheritance, all of these laws are affected by the Divorce Amendment Act because all of these laws are going to contaminate the Sharia because people want secular relief and giving up on Allah's law. So the net effect of all of this is that whilst there's an A3 piece of paper that's going to say the nikah is now registered at Home Affairs, and so you're married people, and so if somebody dies, like the Jamaah Party have been pushing all along, somebody dies, it's not going to say unmarried, it's going to say married by Islamic law, married by Muslim law. So that's the only piece of paper that emanates from it. None of this is anywhere near Islamic.
Yousha, did the Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber miss a trick in not consulting various shuyukh, lawyers like yourself in trying to get a better understanding? Because like you, I'd like to believe that this was more a case of just, okay, we're going to go ahead with this amendment and there's no real depth or understanding with regards to nikahs and Muslim marriages.
You know, this has a long history. The then minister post 94, Dullah Umar, if I recall, had a conversation with the president at the time and said, you know, even though we're free, my marriage is not recognized. And I think lots and lots of people since then have been putting into place. We've had the Muslim Marriages Bill, we've had the Omnibus Bill, we've had all these sort of bills to which there's been opposition, and the nature of the opposition is on the basis that you're going to contaminate the Sharia, and we're actually seeing it happen right now. There's a matter in court regarding a Rule 43 application in regard to the position of talaq and the definition of spouse, and that Women's Legal Center judgment has just caused a hell of a lot of confusion because there's a contamination and it's just not going to happen. And you know, many years ago, I was involved in a secular court matter where talaq was declared to be unconstitutional. Astaghfirullah. I mean, who are these kuffar judges to pronounce on Allah's laws? But be that as it may, the net effect of this recognition is that they want to give it the recognition post the judgment, post Dullah Umar's conversation, but they haven't considered the consequences of applying the Sharia law. We don't just want a recognition of the nikah, we want the recognition of the consequences of the nikah and everything that flows from it. All this does is says your nikah certificate can be converted into, but secular law is going to apply. So it doesn't make sense.
Yousha, where to now from here? Because you've hit the nail on the head that a lot of these decisions, a lot of these amendments are against Sharia, number one. A lot of it puts, both parties within the nikah, both the man and the woman, in a very difficult situation. So with this decision made, is there going to be discussions or is there going to be approaching the courts and trying for them to maybe get a better understanding of what Sharia marriage is actually all about?
So, through the submissions that the Muslim Lawyers Association has made over the years in regard to the Muslim Marriages Bill, we've drawn this to the attention of the legislators. We now presented with an opportunity in an ongoing case to show the court, because I have the authority from my Amir to join the matter as an amicus, um, uh, this Rule 43, in which the Constitutional Court judgment is being shown to be a nonsense judgment in regard to Muslim marriages and its consequences. So we're going to join that matter and say, although the Constitutional Court ruled the following and instructed Parliament to do the following, what you're asking is simply impossible if you're not going to allow the complete adoption of Sharia law, Sharia adjudication in all matters. And we provide alternatives. We provide alternatives and say to them, amend the Arbitration Act so that these type of status matters can be dealt with via arbitration, and you'll get rid of the problem. And that hasn't been adhered to. They keep trying to throw legislation at us, and we keep objecting to it, and it keeps getting shelved for periods of time. But there are some Muslim organizations that are certainly pushing for it, and certainly they need to be educated, as they will be now, on the Women's Legal Center judgment and what its consequences is going to do for the Sharia. And ultimately, as Muslims, our obligation is to the Sharia and Allah's laws, and not the secular court.
Yousha, always a pleasure having you on your News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That's Yousha Tayob, attorney at law, just discussing, of course, last week's announcement, and this is not going to be stopping anytime soon. This will be definitely something that will have continuance as it develops. After the break, I speak to Nchikolelo Breakfast. It's back to school, back to reality for members of the ANC. If you want to be part of the ANC, you need to go to school. I'll be speaking to Prof after the break. What does this mean for the African National Congress? Do stay tuned.